Chapter 1: The Alpha's Larder. The scent of chilled steel and exotic spices was the only comfort Jude ever allowed himself. His workspace, the Alpha's private kitchen and larder, was a cathedral of sterile efficiency, far beneath the ornate chaos of the main pack house. He had to be perfect, not because of the Alpha's demands, but because perfection was the only measure of his own worth. Truth be told, if he was flawless in his work, then maybe, just maybe, the injuries he sustained didn't matter so much. Jude moved with the quiet grace of someone who measured life in millimeters. He was an Omega, yes, but one whose silent competence was a legend in this inner circle, a human machine whose purpose was to maintain the facade of the Alpha's flawless life. Today's target, the Silver Service. It wasn't just silver, it was ancient, pack-blessed metal, meant for ceremonial use. "I'll be faster than the tarnishing itself." He paused over a teaspoon, his thumb running over the crest. There! A microscopic flaw, a single point of oxidation barely visible to the naked eye. Most Omegas would ignore it. Most Betas wouldn't even see it. But Jude did. His meticulous nature was his armor, because if he missed the small flaws, he might miss the dangerous, bigger ones. He picked up the flannel, the scent of the specialized polish sharp and clinical in the air. As he rubbed, he focused intensely. Worry about the spoon. Not the scars on your hip. Worry about the polish. Not the way your neck aches from last week. This mental compartmentalization was a necessary ritual. Not only that, but he practiced this discipline every day, maintaining the larder's inventory, perfectly rotating the rare vintages, and ensuring the temperature never fluctuated more than half a degree. It was soothing, hypnotic even. He finished the spoon, holding it up. Flawless. For a brief, detached moment, he felt that quiet, cold satisfaction. He had succeeded. He was valuable. But then, the tranquility was shattered. Clack. 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 The sound of Serafina's custom-made, spiked heel resonated through the ventilation system, echoing from the marble hallway outside. It wasn't the sound of an Alpha's wife strolling, it was the sound of a commanding drumbeat, sharp and demanding attention. Jude's muscles seized. The air, which had been clean and metallic, suddenly thickened with the heavy, sweet, artificial scent of her expensive perfume. Serafina never came down here unless she wanted something private. And private things always hurt. What followed was the heavy sound of the steel door opening, slicing through the silence. Chapter 2: The Hidden Barbs. Serafina drifted into the larder, a vision of polished ivory and predatory grace. She didn't look at the supplies, she looked only at Jude, her smile unsettlingly warm. "Jude, my dear keeper. You are, as always, already here." Her voice was like smooth honey, and Jude knew well how sharp the sting could be beneath that sweetness. "Luna," Jude responded, his voice a low, neutral murmur, careful not to pitch it too high or too low, because any vocal inflection could be interpreted as insubordination. "I merely needed a consultation on the dinner service," she purred, walking past the rows of perfect glassware. An obvious lie. Kane was eating out tonight with neighboring Alphas, there was no formal dinner. "The ancient pack silver is ready, Luna. The porcelain is also prepped." She stopped directly in front of him. Instead of looking at the service, she reached out, her cool fingers lightly touching the seam of his Omega uniform collar. "Such a crisp line, Jude. Truly exceptional work." The alpha relies on you for these small, perfect things, doesn't he? Jude held his breath. Here it comes. Her fingers delicately adjusted his collar, a maternal, caring gesture that any passing beta would admire. In the span of a breath, her thumb pressed down, hard, directly into the soft, tender area where his collarbone met his neck. It was the precise location of a fading, poorly healed bruise from a misplaced carving knife 3 weeks prior. The pain didn't just strike, it bloomed, hot and sharp, radiating out like splintered glass. Jude focused on the refrigerated meat locker behind Serafina, counting the specific cuts of venison. 13 racks. Prime cut. Focus on the venison. He couldn't afford to flinch. He had to absorb the harm, letting her rage, or whatever dark satisfaction this was, expend itself. This was his ingrained loyalty in its purest, most toxic form. Protecting the alpha's life meant protecting Luna's image. It's important to maintain appearances, isn't it, Jude? She whispered, her breath sweet with mint. More importantly, you wouldn't want Kane to worry about silly little accidents, would you? The pressure lessened, leaving behind a throbbing agony and the lingering ghost of her touch. No, Luna. My duty is only to efficiency. Meanwhile, a faint, rhythmic sound began high above them. Thud. 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 The heavy, measured sound of Alpha Kane's boots pacing on the floor of his third-story study, oblivious. The Alpha was caught in the distant politics of the pack, focused on budgets and borders, blindly relying on the facade of his perfect life downstairs. He was safe. Serafina was satisfied. Jude had kept the secret. Yet, a small, dark loop opened in Jude's mind. What if one day, the secret became too big for his body to hide? He glanced at the sharp edge of a meat cleaver nearby. He needed to restock the cellar. Chapter 3: The Near Miss. Jude was still working long after the main house went dark. Despite that, the new injury in his neck made every movement a subtle grind of pain against bone. He was in the deep, remote pantry hallway, tasked with retrieving and reshelving a monstrously heavy, decorative stone urn, a relic Serafina had demanded moved immediately, because she knew it was difficult and dangerous for one person. The urn was a colossal, ugly thing, sitting far too high. Jude used the heavy-duty rolling ladder. He felt the pull in his already compromised rib muscles as he strained. Just get it down. Quietly. Fast. The ladder creaked a protest, and Jude hesitated. The weight was unbalanced. He was exhausted. Without warning, his foot slipped on the second-to-last rung, and the urn, which weighed as much as he did, tipped. Time seemed to slow. The polished ceramic was rushing toward his head, a sudden, brutal consequence of fatigue compounded by prior injury. His body moved on instinct, twisting out of the way, not with strength, but with a horrifying, desperate agility honed by years of avoidance. The urn crashed against the metal shelves, leaving a deep metallic clang that sounded deafening in the sleeping house. It didn't fall entirely, but scraped violently against the wall, catching Jude's forearm with its jagged lip. He secured the urn, panting, the adrenaline spiking cold and sharp. His arm felt like fire, but it wasn't a deep cut. Just a long, angry scrape. No need for stitches. No external care. He checked the hallway immediately, listening for any shift in the house's silence. Nothing. Because of that, he knew the noise hadn't been loud enough to wake the alphas sleeping far above. He stood there, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his sore ribs. The fear wasn't for the cut, the fear was that the disruption, the noise, the flaw, would be exposed. The slight break in his skin was bleeding thinly. He quickly pulled up the sleeve of his dark uniform and wiped the small, steady bead of blood against the interior lining, concealing the evidence perfectly. He glanced down the hall. Still, a tiny sliver of yellow light shone from the single window of Alpha Kane's study on the upper floor, a silent monument to the Alpha's perpetual occupation and blind reliance on the perfection Jude presented. Kane was safe in his world of authority and data. Jude was safe in his world of silence and pain. The equilibrium was restored. His secret was safe. For now. Chapter 4: The Collapse. The larder felt colder than usual that morning. The heavy, metallic smell, usually comforting, now seemed to press down on Jude, mirroring the pressure in his bruised chest. He was trying to finish inventorying the high-tech preservation unit, a dense, steel shelving system tucked away in the deepest corner. Truth be told, the whole unit had been unstable for months, ever since a botched Omega supply delivery hit its base supports during a previous, covered-up incident involving a slipped tray. Jude ran a hand over the metal frame. He felt the minute tremor, a vibration that shouldn't be there. Deep down, he knew the truth. The metal fatigue wasn't from age, it was a slow consequence of too many forced impacts and quick, silent fixes he had to perform under duress. Now, the weight of the specialized preservation liquids was too much for the compromised structure. He reached for a high container of rare truffle oil. As fire bloomed beneath his skin from the lingering pain in his neck and ribs, he stretched, compensating for the injury he was trying to hide. That tiny shift in weight distribution was all it took. Without warning, the base supports gave way with a deafening, tearing screech. The entire massive shelving unit, a wall of steel and heavy glass, pitched forward. In the span of a breath, Jude felt his world tilt. He didn't shout. His pure, animal instinct, the reflex honed by years of ingrained loyalty, was not to cry out, but to absorb the shock in silence. Don't make a sound. Don't cause a scene. He threw his arms up, not to save himself, but to somehow guide the metal so the main impact wouldn't hit anything structural in the house itself. The impact was brutal. A searing, blinding flash of pain ripped through his back and across his ribs as the steel edge slammed down, pinning him to the floor. It wasn't just physical agony, it was the terror of exposure, a fear so cold it eclipsed the white-hot pain. This is too big. This can't be fixed silently. What followed was a dizzying, sickening pressure that made it impossible to breathe, crushing the air from his lungs. The smell of leaking preservation fluid, sharp and chemical, filled his mouth. He focused his failing senses, fighting the blackness. He needed to ensure that if he was found, the collapse looked like a simple, mechanical failure. Soon after, he heard the frantic shouts of betas. The sharp, unfamiliar sound of heavy rescue gear being deployed. The pack alarm wasn't sounding, so they were keeping it quiet. Good. His final thought, before the pain won and the world dissolved into silent darkness, was a strange relief mixed with the overwhelming scent of Alpha Kane, sharp, analytical, and utterly present, right above him. Chapter 5: The Cold Light of Evidence. Jude blinked, the fluorescent light of the high-tech infirmary burning against his eyelids. He was suspended in a matrix of medical technology, tubes, wires, and a rigid, cold brace supporting his ribs. Everything was too clean, too sterile, and terrifyingly public. This was not his dark, controllable larder. This was a place where silence was impossible. His breath was shallow, each inhale a knife twist, but the intense, mechanical fear outweighed the pain. They saw me. The secret is out. A woman stood over him, a slender beta doctor with impersonal, cool hands. She wasn't one of the Alpha's inner circle, she was an objective medical professional brought in from an allied pack, which meant she was obligated only to empirical truth, not the pack house's carefully curated facade. "You're lucky, Omega Jude," she stated, her voice flat, adjusting a dial on his rib brace. 3 fractured ribs and severe muscular trauma. Your healing is good, but your body is complicated. Instead of asking about his recovery, Jude whispered, "Did the structure damage the main kitchen?" The doctor didn't react to his concern for the house. She held up a small, holographic projection, a detailed, 3-dimensional scan of his torso. The image was overwhelming. It wasn't just the fresh, jagged breaks of his ribs, beneath them, his body was a tapestry of faded white lines. With every heartbeat, he stared at the map of his hidden history. Small scars from hot oil burns, linear marks from precise knife slips, the telltale discoloration from repeated blunt impacts. "We ran a full historical scan," the doctor continued, pointing to a clustered area near his left shoulder. "These older injuries, they are meticulous. They are concentrated and cyclical. They aren't random kitchen hazards, Jude. They show a pattern of repeated, intentional trauma, perfectly disguised to heal just short of needing external intervention." Jude felt a cold sweat break out despite the regulated room temperature. His body, the vessel he had forced into silent competence for years, had betrayed him. He tried to speak, to offer the prepared lie, clumsiness, just a lot of accidents, but his throat closed up. Just like that, everything changed. His worthlessness was exposed not by a confession, but by forensic evidence. A beat later, the main door hissed open, and the air pressure in the room shifted. A scent of power, cold focus, and expensive leather filled the room. Chapter 6: The Alpha's Presence. Kane, the Alpha, stood framed in the doorway. He wasn't in his usual tailored suit but in rougher, pack-duty wear, his golden eyes deep-set and serious. He carried a digital pad, its screen glowing faintly. He didn't come to comfort, he came to analyze. His presence was like the sudden closing of a vault door. He didn't greet the doctor. He didn't ask about Jude's pain. Rather, he walked straight to the table, his powerful gaze locked onto the holographic skin of Jude's scarred side, which the doctor had left on display. Kane's face was unreadable, the perfect mask of unquestionable authority and analytical mind. He looked up, meeting Jude's terrified gaze. "The lead doctor told me your injuries required a full review, given your proximity to my personal quarters." Kane's voice was low, heavy, and utterly devoid of emotion. "She sent me the complete file." He didn't ask, "Who did this?" Instead, he asked, "The inventory log for Preservation Unit 7B. You noted structural instability 3 months ago, but marked it as cosmetic wear. Why did you lie in your report, Omega?" The abrupt shift from personal injury to professional audit was a shock. Kane wasn't looking for a victim, he was looking for a breach in the system. Jude felt a powerful surge of the old ingrained loyalty. He had to steer the Alpha away from the truth. It was a low-priority error, Alpha, Jude managed, the words catching in his dry throat. "Because fixing it would have required external labor, and I pride myself on minimizing disruption. I pride myself on protecting Luna." Kane didn't argue. He simply set his digital pad down on the bedside table. The screen went dark for a moment, but then it flared back to life, showing the clinical image of Jude's side by side with a timeline of Kane's own security logs, charting Serafina's movements. The implication, that Kane was cross-referencing Jude's wounds with Serafina's schedule, was a punch to Jude's gut more crippling than the shelf collapse. The Alpha didn't need Jude's confession. He had the objective evidence right there. Kane stared at Jude, his eyes unsettlingly deep, directly challenging Jude's mask of calm, forcing Jude to brace against an inevitable confrontation that still hadn't arrived. The moment their eyes locked, Jude realized his true nightmare wasn't being hurt, it was having the alpha witness his failure. Chapter 7: Kane's Cold Logic. The sterile smell of disinfectant had replaced the comforting metallic scent of the larder. Jude lay still, the rib brace a physical representation of his current confinement. The infirmary was a room of unforgiving white, and the sheer visibility of it was terrifying. He missed the shadows of his kitchen. Alpha Kane returned an hour later, alone. He didn't sit, but stood by the foot of the bed, holding the data pad like a jury verdict. His demeanor wasn't aggressive, it was worse. It was clinically disappointing. "I don't want excuses, Jude," Kane began, his voice flat, his golden alpha aura suppressed to a cool, focused hum. "I want accounting." The medical team noted 17 distinct injuries in the last 2 years that required active regeneration beyond standard trauma. They were all superficial, but specific. Not only that, but they correlate with the days Serafina utilized the private kitchen for charity baking. Kane's analytical mind was working overtime, and Jude could practically feel the cold, hard logic radiating off him. Kane wasn't asking if the abuse happened, he was asking how Jude, a supposed master of efficiency, allowed such a repetitive flaw into the system. "Explain the scar above your left kidney," Kane commanded. "It's thin, deep, and perfectly linear. Too clean for a slip. I need a logical explanation." Jude swallowed, the adrenaline making his muscles tremble. He had to deflect. He had to protect her. Because he believed that Serafina's perfection was essential to Kane's strength, and Kane's strength was essential to the pack's survival. This was the core of his ingrained loyalty. "That was the heavy French rolling pin, Alpha," Jude lied smoothly, focusing on the ceiling tile pattern. "It was stored improperly, and when I reached it, it tumbled. I caught it. But then, the edge caught me before I could completely stop its momentum. Why can't he just accept my competence as an answer?" Kane's gaze narrowed. "The French rolling pin is 38 centimeters long. Your injury is 15 centimeters. That means it struck you at the exact center of its rotation. Mathematically improbable for a tumble, Jude." The relentless logic was mentally exhausting. Jude couldn't fight the math. He tried a different tactic. "I am an Omega, Alpha. We are clumsy. We are disposable. The kitchen is full of dangers. This is normal." He used the language of his worthlessness, hoping it would satisfy the Alpha's need for a logical categorization. As the silence stretched, Kane simply sighed, a sound of immense frustration. He wasn't frustrated with Jude's alleged clumsiness, he was frustrated with the contradictions. He stood for another minute, watching Jude. Despite that, he offered no comfort, no reassurance. He just placed the data pad back on the table, still displaying the scar map. "Stay here, Jude. You are under my protection now," Kane stated, his voice low and final. He turned to leave. Moments later, the heavy door clicked shut. Jude heard the beta guard outside shift his weight against the wall. He wasn't a patient anymore. He was a prisoner of the truth, locked outside of his own control. Chapter 8: The Unseen Guard. The knowledge of his confinement felt worse than the broken ribs. In the larder, Jude had autonomy. Here, every noise, every footstep, every action was observed. Jude needed to confirm the level of surveillance. He didn't know what scared him more, Serafina's retribution or the complete loss of his daily routine. He signaled the nearest guard, Beta Kel. Kel was a large, stoic man, usually preoccupied with outside security. "Beta Kel," Jude murmured, keeping his voice weak and respectful. My apologies for the inconvenience. I need my small, blue, specialized sharpening stone from the second drawer in the dry storage larder. It's a habit. I can't properly settle without knowing it's sharp and ready. Kel, who had been leaning casually against the door frame, immediately straightened. Alpha's orders, Omega. No unauthorized movement or deliveries to this room. Nothing leaves or enters the secure zone without the head doctor's direct approval. The refusal was firm, but polite. That's why Jude knew this order came directly from Kane, not the medical staff. Kane had completely cut him off from his source of competence and comfort, the kitchen. He was isolated, sterile, and helpless. As if pulled by a string, a wave of claustrophobic dread washed over Jude. The walls seemed to press in. The physical pain was a dull ache compared to the agonizing freedom he had lost. His physical safety was guaranteed, but his mental freedom was zero. With every heartbeat, Jude realized he was no longer protecting the Alpha's perfection, he was the center of the Alpha's imperfection. This public spotlight, the attention of the Beta Guard, the antiseptic smells, it all felt like punishment for being flawed. Then, a soft, overwhelmingly sweet and synthetic scent drifted in from the hallway. It was Serafina's custom perfume, a blend of imported lilies and expensive musk, a smell that screamed luxury and danger. It was entirely out of place in the antiseptic infirmary, cutting through the clean air like a velvet razor. Chapter 9, Serafina's Warning. Jude's breath hitched. How did she get past the Beta Guard? Serafina didn't knock. She simply entered, a vision of concern and grace, clutching a small, white lily. My poor, dear Jude, she whispered, her voice layered with manufactured sorrow. She dismissed Kel with a languid wave of her hand. The Alpha has been so distressed about your accident. I simply had to check on my keeper. She approached the bed, her face a mask of empathetic grief. Her thoughts spun. Jude could feel the subtle shift in her scent, a barely detectable, sharp ozone smell beneath the perfume, the scent of a predator controlling her anger. I brought you this. She placed the lily on the bedside table. Instead of backing away, she leaned in close, her hair brushing his cheek. She reached out, her cool fingers running up his arm. You have always been such a loyal servant, she murmured, her eyes wide and wet with fake tears. Not only that, but her touch seemed entirely tender. But then, her cool fingers reached his forearm and subtly rested on the intravenous drip insertion point. Her thumb pressed down, not hard enough to trigger a massive alarm, but enough to send a short, sharp spike of pain through his vein, a physical jolt to accompany her whispered words. Remember our shared sacred burden, Omega? The pack cannot afford flaws, and Alpha Kane deserves a perfect mate. Your silence is all that holds the perfection together. Her eyes promised swift, unseen, unimaginable retribution. Jude's entire body tensed. His breath caught. He looked at her, meeting her gaze with the blank wall of his worthlessness. He couldn't speak. He didn't flinch. He absorbed the subtle, physical warning. I understand. The secret is safe. The ingrained loyalty reflex fired, locking down his mind. In the quiet that followed, Serafina straightened, smiled sweetly at the Beta Guard outside, and left the room, the scent of lilies trailing behind her. Jude watched her serene, charming exit, recognizing her ability to penetrate the Alpha's guarded space was not only terrifying but also a clear threat. She could reach him anywhere. His greatest fear was realized, the secret was exposed to Kane, but Serafina believed his loyalty would still enforce his silence. Chapter 10, The Observation Log. The scent of Serafina's perfume, though faint, still hung heavy in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of antiseptic and Jude's own lingering fear. He knew the Alpha would be back. With his scent in the air, Jude kept his gaze fixed on the ceiling, trying to regain his composure. After that, Kane returned, but this time, the coldness was different. The disappointment was gone, replaced by a terrible, controlled intensity. He didn't look at the scar map. He looked at Jude's eyes. "I haven't talked to my Luna yet," Kane said, his voice quiet, dangerous. "I did something else first." He presented Jude with the digital pad again, but the screen displayed a new document, Jude's own meticulously kept larder supply usage log. This wasn't medical data, this was Jude's silent competence digitized. Kane pointed to 3 separate entries over the past year. "Look at these, Jude. These dates correspond to 3 of the most precisely disguised injuries on your lower back. On those exact days, the logs show an unprecedented, immediate depletion of 3 specific, expensive ingredients: saffron, imported ginger, and rare vanilla bean." Jude felt a cold dread creep up his spine. These were items Serafina requested specifically, always under the guise of an experimental recipe, just before an incident. He didn't know what scared him more, that Serafina was so predictable, or that Kane had noticed the pattern. "Logically, Jude, these ingredients are used for complicated, volatile preparations," Kane continued. "They require a focus that would naturally lead to a careless accident, because your attention was split. But your log also shows they were restocked immediately afterward, without the usual accounting delay. Why the rush to replace the evidence, Omega?" Jane looked away, staring at the floor. His chest ached. His immediate goal was still to protect Serafina. The Luna requested a high volume for a charity function, Alpha. "I simply prioritized her order." "That is incorrect," Kane cut in, his voice rising, shattering the controlled quiet. He didn't need the information from Jude, he needed Jude to confirm his own truth. "My schedule log shows I was in the pack house during all 3 incidents. The depletion coincided not with a function, but with our private dinners, when Serafina wanted me to be especially calm and compliant. On the other hand, your injuries consistently followed these rapid depletions." Kane pushed the pad toward Jude. "Confirm the log's accuracy, Jude. I need you to uphold your silent competence on this data. Yes or no, are these entries accurate?" Jude realized the terrible power in his own records. His perfection was about to condemn his loyalty. He couldn't lie about the data, that would be betraying his duty to the Alpha. He gave a single, slow, devastating nod. "Yes, Alpha. The data is accurate." Kane stared at him, the intense focus of the Alpha dissolving into something raw and painful. Before he could speak, Kane turned abruptly. "I have to talk to my Luna now. Do not leave this room." The words weren't a command to Jude's body, but a stark, final warning. Chapter 11, The Echo of Confrontation, Midpoint Shift. A minute after Kane left, the room felt hollowed out. Jude lay in tense, agonizing expectation. He didn't have to wait long. Just like that, a psychic ripple hit him, a sudden, sharp emotional whiplash through the pack's low ambient link. It wasn't the calm, ordered signal of the pack, it was chaos. He felt searing, uncontrolled alpha anger mixed with a high, chilling pitch of Luna fury, a venomous, self-righteous sound that vibrated deep in his omega bones. They were fighting. Kane knew. The midpoint shift had occurred. Jude had never felt the Alpha's rage channeled so directly, or Luna's fury so exposed. He felt it, clear as day. Kane was confronting Serafina with the evidence, Jude's own meticulous records. This wasn't just physical pain, this was the political war starting. My secret, my worthless, small secret, is tearing the Alpha's bond apart. Her world tilted. He knew Serafina would turn this back on him, and the terror that she would know he was the source was immediate and suffocating. The air thickened. At the same time, the infirmary door opened and a new nurse, a female gamma with sharp eyes and a tight bun, entered to check his for. She usually gave a brief, kind smile. Instead, her eyes darted away, avoiding his gaze entirely. Her hands were rougher as she adjusted the tubes, and she didn't speak a word. Her manner was suddenly cold and dismissive, like touching something contaminated. To make things worse, she sniffed dramatically as she pulled away, wiping her hands on her trousers. The change was palpable. Jude realized Serafina was already at work. The battle had left the private suite and was now focused on Jude's reputation. Chapter 12: The Cold Shoulder. Jude endured the Gamma's professional cruelty, the shift in attitude slicing sharper than any of Serafina's small knives. Because of that cold shoulder, Jude needed to test the depth of the rumors. He attempted a basic, non-medical request. He signaled a nearby orderly, a younger male Gamma who often brought him hot tea. "Gamma," Jude asked, his voice low and apologetic. "Could you possibly retrieve an extra blanket? My core temperature feels unusually low." The orderly, who had previously been quite friendly and chatty, aggressively stepped back. His face was set in a glare of undisguised contempt. His response was a low, rumbling growl of disapproval. "I'm busy, Omega," Gamma snapped. "You need to rest. If you need special treatment, you can wait for the head doctor." He was clearly trying to pick a fight, trying to provoke a reaction. Not only that, but he exchanged a quick, meaningful whisper with the beta guard outside the room. Jude's enhanced hearing, a benefit of his Omega lineage often useful for listening for the Alpha's requests, caught the words clearly. "Unstable, they say. Attention-seeking. Alpha Cain is having to deal with a severe disciplinary matter, not an accident." Jude shut his eyes. The familiar, painful sting of his worthlessness resurfaced, but this time it was weaponized by the pack. Serafina hadn't just stopped the physical harm, she had shifted the battlefield. She was using her reputational shield and narcissistic charisma to frame him as a neurotic, manipulative Omega trying to destabilize the Alpha's marriage. As the echo faded, the reality solidified. His safety now lay not in silence, but in fighting the lie that was being built around him. "What does it matter if I'm not hurt, if the whole pack believes I'm mad?" This shift meant that Jude's original goal, keeping the secret for the Alpha's sake, was now actively endangering the Alpha's reputation. The stakes were now Cain's status, the pack's stability, and Jude's very credibility. Chapter 13: The Question of Treason. The hostility from the pack staff was a constant, low-grade fever. Jude felt the eyes, the dismissive sniffs, the whispered accusations of instability. He was no longer just an Omega, he was a liability. He didn't know what scared him more, the idea of Serafina touching him again, or the fact that his ingrained loyalty was now serving her malicious lie. A beat later, Cain returned. He didn't look analytical now, he looked stressed. The raw, tense scent of an Alpha pushing his limits clung to him. He didn't bother with the data pad. "The Council is demanding my review of judgment," Cain stated, his voice tight. "Serafina is using her pack mother history, her sacred bond, to paint you as a long-term spy. Someone Martin, the previous Alpha, might have planted to destabilize our new administration." Jude felt a tremor run through him. Spy? Treason? The penalty for treason was exile, or worse. As the air thickened, Jude realized his secret had grown from a private shame to a pack-wide existential threat. Cain leaned in, his gaze demanding absolute honesty. "Jude, look at me. Answer this question, Omega. Do you believe your silence, your loyalty, is still protecting this pack, or is it actively enabling its destruction?" The question sliced through Jude's core misbelief, the idea that his silence was noble. Cain wasn't asking him to save himself, he was asking him to save the pack from the Luna. In that moment, the reflex of ingrained loyalty clashed violently with a new, terrifying obligation, duty to the Alpha himself. "Alpha, Jude whispered, his voice trembling only slightly. The reason I was silent was to preserve the structure. Instead, he met Kane's gaze, the decision a painful, grinding shift inside him. Now my silence ensures she takes this pact down with her. Kane nodded slowly, his expression softening fractionally, recognizing the immense cost of that admission. As if fate demanded it, Jude slowly, decisively, moved his head, a single, final commitment. Yes, I will speak. I accept your protection, Alpha, Jude stated, his voice regaining its practiced control. I will tell you everything. But you must ask the right questions. Her methods were not random. They were meticulously timed. Chapter 14, Mapping the Malice. The atmosphere immediately shifted to intense cooperation. Jude was no longer a victim or a prisoner, he was the key witness. Before either could speak of the danger they were in, Kane produced a compact, encrypted recording device from his inner pocket, packed technology far beyond anything in Jude's kitchen. Start with the patterns, Jude, Kane instructed, his voice low and focused. Where did she cut corners when she thought she was successful? Jude took a deep breath, letting his observational acuity take over. The process was clinical, detached. The shame and fear were overridden by the desperate need to deliver verifiable, objective evidence that could withstand Serafina's emotional charm. The knives were precise, Alpha, Jude began, his voice taking on the professional, monotone rhythm of a man reciting inventory. Not only that, but her methods were consistent. The superficial knife wounds, the slips, always coincided with the cleaning of a rare, heat-sensitive dishcloth. Because she knew I had to use water that was too hot for my hands, which made the small wounds appear larger, like a clumsy burn. He described specific dates, times, and the exact type of injury. He revealed the true story behind the broken foot from 6 months ago. It wasn't a fall, but a heavy marble mortar dropped on his instep during a tense argument between Kane and the council. Serafina had needed the Alpha calm, and the pain had been the required sacrifice. As the truth unraveled, Jude's voice broke slightly only once, describing the look of detached curiosity in Serafina's eyes. This was his point of no return. He was laying bare his deepest, most shameful secrets for the man he was sworn to protect. More importantly, he offered critical, irrefutable detail. The most severe injuries, Alpha, always occurred within a 5-minute window when your security logs show you were moving from your third-floor study to the second-floor library. She needed you close enough for the send of her distress to reach you, but far enough away that the sounds of my pain couldn't. Kane simply stared at the recorder, his hand clenching into a fist. The objective proof of her conscious intent, not madness, but calculated malice, was recorded. Chapter 15, The Direct Threat. The tension broke, but the danger escalated instantly. Kane left the room with the encrypted recorder, and Jude felt a momentary, draining sense of relief. The work is done. Meanwhile, the hostility from the medical staff vanished. Instead, a beta messenger, uniformed and overly polite, arrived. He carried a silver tray with a single, exquisite bowl of clear broth and a small, folded note. Compliments of the Luna, Omega Jude, the beta said, his smile too wide. She heard you weren't eating. Jude looked at the meal. It was personalized, a complex, traditional Omega broth, made with specific herbs only Jude knew how to source. It smelled delicious, rich with savory stock and fresh greens. The note, written in Serafina's elegant hand, simply read, a return to the familiar. Rest well, my keeper. As if summoned, Jude felt a sudden, ice-cold clarity. This was not a sentimental offering. This was Serafina's final, direct strike. Her instincts surged. She knew he had spoken. He slowly inhaled the broth's aroma, using his silent competence, his professional sense of taste and smell, as a weapon. He didn't detect common poisons. He detected something far more subtle, a barely perceptible flavor note, digitalis. A potent toxin that, in small, carefully measured doses, caused severe cardiac distress and neurological failure, symptoms that could be easily mistaken for complications from the rib trauma and high stress. Elimination. She wasn't trying to punish him, she was trying to neutralize the key witness before Cain could act. Without thinking, Jude carefully lifted the bowl, carried it to the medical waste receptacle used for soiled dressings, and sealed the entire contents, broth, silver tray, and the poisonous lily scent of the note, inside the high-grade disposal unit. He wiped his hands on the sheet, feeling the adrenaline recede. He didn't spill a drop. He then pulled the sheets up to his chin and closed his eyes, pretending to fall into a deep sleep. He had given his testimony. Now, he had to survive the night. He was completely defenseless, but he was no longer silent. The war was officially underway. Chapter 16, The Frame-Up. Jude didn't sleep. He couldn't. He lay rigid, listening to the sterile silence, knowing Seraphina's counterattack was coming. The taste of the fear from the poisoned broth still lingered, metallic and chilling. In the quiet that followed, he rehearsed his testimony, determined not to let the Alpha's faith in him be in vain. But then, the infirmary door burst open, not with the Alpha's controlled intensity, but with aggressive, sanctioned authority. Two high-ranking betas, their uniforms stiff and their sense radiating judgmental contempt, marched in, flanking a smaller, cold-eyed gamma he didn't recognize. This was the pack's judicial arm. The lead beta, a fierce warrior named Torvin, didn't bother with a greeting. He simply waved a digital warrant. Omega Jude, you are officially detained. The Pack Council has received irrefutable evidence concerning the willful, unauthorized tampering of essential medical supplies and the theft of Pack assets for personal gain. Jude felt a cold, immediate shock. Not the kitchen. The infirmary. Seraphina hadn't focused on the past, she focused on the present. She had framed him using his current situation. As if the world narrowed, Jude realized how perfect the trap was. He was the only one with access who had been cut off from his support system. His silent competence was now the ultimate weapon against him. This, Torvin stated, holding up a small, sealed evidence bag that contained vials of diluted painkiller concentrate, was found in a container marked Omega Personal Property delivered to your room just yesterday. It is highly illegal to possess. You are accused of self-medicating and diverting Pack resources. Jude stared at the bag. He had received no such container. He didn't know what scared him more, the fabricated evidence or the speed and reach of Seraphina's influence. She was using her reputational shield to suggest he was unstable, desperate, and deceitful. What's worse, the Gamma stepped forward, his expression full of pious outrage. You were seen, Omega. The evidence is sound. You were trying to manipulate your medical records. Her body moved on instinct. Jude's own instinct was to remain compliant, to avoid escalating the public scene. Shouting denial would only confirm the rumors of instability. He allowed the betas to unplug him from the monitors and cuff his hands behind the brace. The humiliation was total. He had escaped Seraphina's physical control only to be imprisoned by her lies. Just like that, he was ripped from the sterile white of the infirmary and quickly escorted down a series of cold, stone service tunnels toward the Pack's high-security holding block. Chapter 17, The Public Betrayal. The lockup cell was small, dark, and smelled of stale concrete and despair, the exact opposite of the larder's comforting chill. An hour later, the heavy door slid open. The scent of authority, sharp and familiar, entered. Cain was there, but he looked shattered. His uniform was rumpled, and his eyes carried the weight of a severe internal conflict. He didn't speak the way an alpha speaks to a witness, he spoke like a commander delivering devastating orders. Jude. The council is in uproar. Serafina, leveraging the sympathy vote, revealed that the Omega larder logs you confirmed were found altered after I spoke to her. They've been perfectly redacted, pinning the missing supplies on your negligence. Therefore, the evidence you gave me is now useless. It looks like a retaliatory lie. Jude leaned against the cold wall, the hard steel digging into his broken ribs. His ribs were in pain, but Kane's words were crushing. She was 2 steps ahead. They've seized the recorder, Kane continued, the pain clear in his voice. I can't fight this politically right now. The pressure is too intense. They're questioning my judgment, my bond, and my ability to lead. They are demanding a full, unbiased investigation into me. Despite that, Jude felt a moment of clear, agonizing understanding. Kane had to choose the pack over the Omega. He had to choose temporary retreat over immediate civil war. I have to temporarily withdraw my protection, Jude. Publicly, Kane finished, the words like lead. I have to allow the investigation to proceed. It will look like I abandoned you. Because if I try to fight now, I risk the alpha position entirely, and the pack descends into chaos. Jude accepted the political necessity without protest. He knew Kane was speaking the truth of command. But the reality was a knife twist. The worthlessness he had battled for so long surged back, cold and absolute. I knew it. The bond, Luna's status, they are too powerful to defeat. I am disposable. The cost of the truth was abandonment. In the echo of his voice, Kane hesitated, his hand reaching out, then pulling back, unable to offer comfort. Then, he left Jude alone in the small, silent cell, the scent of alpha authority quickly replaced by the heavy, damp smell of pure despair. Chapter 18, Dark Night of the Soul. The silence that followed Kane's departure was the heaviest thing Jude had ever carried. He was alone, framed as a traitor, and abandoned by the only person who had believed him. His heart skipped. He thought back to the kitchen, to the meticulous order, to the shame of those years. The terrible, crushing realization came, his ingrained loyalty wasn't noble. It was a selfish act of pride, an attempt to prove his worth by protecting the Alpha's perfect household. He hadn't protected Kane, he had enabled the destruction. His silence hadn't saved the pack, it had caused the disaster. He was right all along. He was worthless. He curled into himself, ignoring the throbbing pain in his ribs. He was at his lowest point. I tried to prove I was valuable, and instead, I became the wrecking ball. He didn't know what scared him more, dying in this cell or living with the failure of causing the Alpha's downfall. With a single glance, Jude looked down at his left wrist. He ran a fingertip over a faint, old, circular scar, a mark barely visible against his pale skin. The reason he got that scar was that Serafina had demanded a specific, elaborate, time-consuming menu that day, pushing him past exhaustion. He had dropped a full bowl of boiling stock to prevent a visible tear in his uniform from being noticed by a visiting beta. That day, I sacrificed food, my skin, and my pain to save a seam. She felt it, clear as day, the memory of that burning stock, and suddenly, the internal switch flipped. He realized his worth was not in being the Omega who covered the seams, but the man who spoke the truth, regardless of the cost to himself. He didn't have to fight for Kane, he had to fight for the truth now. Not for pride, not for loyalty, but to finally reject the lie of his own worthlessness. The despair was still there, but beneath it, a tiny, hard kernel of resolve formed. The wind carried his name, the name he had almost forgotten in the service of his master. He was Jude. And he wouldn't let Serafina win this lie. He had to find a way to make his silent competence speak again. Chapter 19, The Hidden Detail. The concrete was cold beneath Jude's fingertips. He was no longer curled in despair, but coiled in focus. As the echo faded from his dark night of the soul, the absolute clarity of his new purpose settled. Serafina must be stopped, not for Cain, but for the truth itself. Soon after, the jailer returned, tossing Jude's simple Omega rank sigil onto the floor. It was made of dull, heavy metal, the symbol of his service. Jude picked it up. He focused on the 5 human senses and was descriptive. The metal felt cool and rough against his palms. The scent of the cell, stale dampness, made him want to scrub the item clean. He began meticulously polishing the sigil with the edge of his tunic, a return to his mechanical competence. As he cleaned the item, his mind wasn't on the shine, it was replaying the frame-up, the stage detention, the high-ranking betas, the evidence bag containing the stolen medical supplies. Wait. He paused. His breathing hitched. Her voice trembled, not his voice, but a sudden inner realization that shook his calm. The timing. The arrest happened precisely when the beta guards were performing their 10 p.m. lockdown sweep. Not only that, but Serafina's most meticulous, successful accidents always occurred between 11:15 p.m. and 11:20 p.m. This was the exact 5-minute window when Cain was moving upstairs and the main service hallway camera had a known, momentary blind spot caused by a shifting exterior light sensor. But then, the medical supply frame-up occurred at 10:05 p.m. That was a high-traffic time, when the infirmary camera feed was running clean. Why would Serafina, the master of subtle timing, choose a vulnerable hour for a massive frame-up? In that moment, the flaw became blindingly obvious. She didn't choose the time, she was forced to choose the time. Because she needed to act before Cain could make his testimony public, she didn't have the luxury of waiting for her preferred, predictable security blind spot. She sacrificed the perfect window for immediate action. Her arrogance and urgency, her habitual pattern of timing, had been her downfall. She forgot that her new crime couldn't follow the old schedule. Jude ran a finger over the sigil, his mind already 3 steps ahead. He found a tiny, concealed piece of soft lead that held the sigil's badge in place. He pressed the lead out. As the truth unraveled, he scratched a single, complex symbol onto the stone floor of his cell, a precise diagram showing the timeline of the 2 security systems overlapping, and the 5-minute hole where the old attacks occurred. This wasn't a confession, it was an analytical calculation. He was no longer a servant begging for belief, he was giving the Alpha a tactical weapon. Chapter 20, The Alpha's Gambit. The door creaked open, but this time, the footsteps were softer, faster. Cain had used a clandestine, non-official entry, bypassing the guards. His scent was sharp with urgency and hidden tension. Cain scanned the room, his eyes immediately locking onto the complex symbol scratched into the floor. He knelt, tracing the lines. The 11:15 blind spot, he murmured, his voice hushed with realization. You're saying her past attacks required my absence for the noise, but my proximity for the link. Jude moved quickly. Without another word, he explained the insight, the difference between the old pattern, precise time, precise location, and the new frame-up, hurried time, different location. That's why the timing of the staged medical theft proved Serafina's conscious intent to neutralize Jude before a specific meeting, the very meeting where Cain planned to present a recorder. It's proof of malice aforethought, Alpha. Not just emotional instability, Jude whispered, his voice clinical. She sacrificed her safety for speed. The lie is in the timing. Cain stared at the symbol, then at Jude. The raw honesty, the undeniable logic, and the immense courage it took for Jude to present this while locked in a cell finally shattered the last barrier of Cain's doubt. He saw Jude, not as an Omega servant, but as a brilliant, terrifyingly loyal partner. As the bond pulsed between them, a silent, nonverbal connection based on shared objective truth, not emotional desire, Cain nodded. The council is scheduled for a preliminary hearing on my judgment tomorrow morning. I will move for a formal pack assembly immediately. We will force the confrontation now. Cain placed his hand on the cold metal bars separating them, a quiet, nonverbal affirmation of mutual commitment. With every step he took away from the cell, he knew he was walking into a political firestorm, but he had the truth now. Chapter 21, Preparing the Stage. Jude didn't stay in the lockup long. By the time the sun began to rise, he was quietly moved by two trusted, high-ranking betas loyal to Cain to a secure holding room near the Grand Assembly Hall. He was given a crisp, new, dark uniform, not the white of an Omega servant, but the deep charcoal gray of a pack witness. He felt physically lighter, though the pain of his ribs was immense. Jude reviewed it. His thoughts spun through the clinical, factual data points he meticulously gathered, the exact measurements, the timing logs, the subtle lies. He didn't know what scared him more, the idea of standing before the entire pack, or the rush of profound, quiet resolve that came with knowing he was finally fighting on the right side of his own truth. He was no longer fighting for silence, but for the devastating sound of truth. He practiced the delivery in his head, clinical, detailed, and utterly devoid of emotional vulnerability. He would use his silent competence to destroy her reputational shield. As the sky darkened, the deep, resonant sound of the pack council being officially called to order echoed down the hallway. It was an ancient sound, signifying the highest judgment. The end was imminent. The stage was set for the final, brutal confrontation. Chapter 22, The Climax, Public Testimony. The Grand Assembly Hall was immense, draped in ancient pack banners, filled with the collective 10% of the pack council, mostly betas, alphas, and influential gammas. The air was thick with expectation and political anxiety. Jude stood before them, dressed in the austere charcoal of a witness, his rib brace hidden beneath the fabric, his hands resting lightly on the velvet railing of the dais. As the silence roared, Cain began, his voice commanding the hall, laying out the objective evidence, the medical file of Jude's repetitive, specific injuries, side by side with the original, unedited Larder logs. He presented data, not emotion. Then, Cain turned to Jude. Omega Jude. Tell the council about the timing of the false evidence presented against you yesterday. Jude met the hostile, skeptical gazes of the council members. He didn't use flowery language. He spoke with the clinical, unfeeling precision of his silent competence. Alpha Cain's security logs show Seraphina's pattern of injuries consistently occurred between 11:15 p.m. and 11:20 p.m., Jude stated, his voice steady. Because that 5-minute window was a known, exterior security blind spot, guaranteeing the quiet needed to contain the incident. He paused, letting the data sink in. With every heartbeat, he felt the raw rush of his worthlessness being shattered by his own courage. The false evidence, the staged medical supply theft, occurred at 10:05 p.m., he continued. That time is highly visible on all security feeds. The change in timing proves malice aforethought. Seraphina was forced to move before the Alpha could present my testimony. She sacrificed her safety and timing to gain speed in the arrest. That single, rushed error proves conscious intent, not emotional instability. Seraphina, seated nearby, had maintained a breathtaking facade of elegant, heartbroken confusion throughout Cain's presentation. But at Jude's final, cold piece of logic, the timing, her composure snapped. You worthless little liar! Seraphina screamed, her voice losing its beautiful cadence, morphing into a raw, hateful shriek. The space between them burned with her rage. She leaped forward, attempting to launch herself at Jude, her lunescence suddenly thick with pure, unmasked malice. The council guards immediately restrained her. As the wind shifted, her screams dissolved into feral snarls and enraged promises of ruin at the loss of control, no longer directed at Jude, but at the betas holding her. The mask was off. Her true nature, devoid of all sacred burden, was exposed by a piece of data from the Omega she deemed insignificant. Chapter 23, Falling Action, The Quiet Aftermath. The chaos was contained quickly. Serafina was led away. The Pack Council, faced with irrefutable data and the raw emotional display, voted unanimously for her immediate removal and censure. Immediately following the climax, Kane found Jude in a quiet antechamber behind the hall. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving Jude profoundly exhausted, shaking slightly. Kane didn't rush him. He simply stood there, his presence authoritative yet subdued. The council is adjourned. The data was enough, Jude. The truth prevailed. He didn't offer comfort or emotional praise. Instead, he offered the only thing an alpha could give a man of Jude's competence: choice. Your service is complete, Kane stated, his gaze steady. You are free of all traditional obligation. You can leave the Pack House, start a new life in the city, or retire completely. You owe us nothing. Your silence saved us from a slow poison, your voice saved us from civil war. Jude processed the freedom. It was a terrifying, unfamiliar emptiness where the ingrained loyalty used to reside. He looked at Kane, seeing him now not as a master, but as a man who had chosen objective truth over his sacred bond. As the silence stretched, Jude shook his head slowly. Alpha. My competence is here. My purpose is here. There are flaws in the logistical systems that require correction. I will stay. But not as a servant. Kane simply nodded. He understood. Without another word, he extended his hand, not a master's command, but a man's nonverbal affirmation of a mutual, equal contract. Jude took it. Chapter 24, Resolution, the New Role. Weeks later. The crisp scent of clean paper and polished cherrywood filled Jude's new office, a bright administrative space with a wide window overlooking the central Pack territory. He was no longer working in the dark basement, he was on the main floor. He wore a crisp uniform of high administrative officer, simple, efficient, and charcoal gray. He was making logistical notes, utilizing his observational acuity to fundamentally restructure the Pack's resource allocation, ensuring fairness and efficiency that Serafina's self-serving corruption had obscured. He felt a quiet self-possession, a confidence earned through his own courage. He felt it, clear as day, the internal peace that came from choosing his purpose. A beat later, the door opened. Kane entered, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, not the elaborate, expensive brew of the Alpha's personal stock, but simple, strong field coffee. Jude, Kane said, his voice easy, familiar. He handed Jude a mug. I need your analysis on the Northern Territorial Patrol routing. The current system shows a 15% efficiency drop during the seasonal shifts. Your input, please. Jude took the mug, the warmth anchoring him. He looked up at the Alpha, and for the first time, he answered as a peer. The flaw is in the scheduling, Alpha, Jude began, tapping his notes. It's not the route. It's the assumption of daylight hours. We need to shift the Gamma teams earlier, because the sun now sets 40 minutes sooner than the current schedule accounts for. As the bond pulsed, no longer master/servant, but 2 competent individuals working toward a shared goal, Kane listened intently. Epilogue scene. Jude stood shoulder to shoulder with Alpha Kane on the highest cliff overlooking the territory. The sun was setting behind them, casting long, sharp shadows over the green land. Jude, in his high administrative uniform, pointed out a necessary change in the patrol routing based on his analysis. Kane listened intently. Jude turned slightly, his new position giving him a fresh perspective on the man he had once silently served. Kane's golden eyes, though still analytical, held a new respect, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had forged through truth and fire. With every step he took away from his past, Jude knew he was moving toward a future defined by his choice.